From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. Andrew with you once again. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D4 3. Derek, we like to think we're pretty good on the virtual hardwood, but as in real life, there are some players that give us problems. We will have some stories about that, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, this week's episode is centered around overpowering CPU-controlled players in basketball video game history. This was also a community question, with the community coming through once again with many responses. However, first, Andrew, we want to give our thoughts. So let's start with you. When I posed this question, which game and player came to mind first?
Well, there's no way that I can go past Shaquille O'Neal in NBA Live 2002. Played him a few times in my NBA Live 2002 franchise with the Sacramento Kings. Always gave me problems. Playing 12-minute quarters, he once dropped 73 points on me, which I think may be the most amount of points that any player has dropped on me in a basketball video game. I could not stop him. No charge button yet, so we can't get some cheap charges. I didn't really use the handshake button as much as I probably should have, but once Shaq gets into the lane in Live 2002, there is very little you can do to stop him. And on 12-minute quarters, ample opportunity to score 73 points. In the next game, I held him to 51 points. And that felt like an achievement. Shaq is a monster in Live 2002. He was obviously a beast in real life at that point as well. But yeah, just unstoppable on the virtual hardwood in that game.
Yeah, it's really not far off from what he was doing in real life around that time. He was so dominant. So it makes sense that they would, overdo it, maybe you could say, in the video game. He's also on my list for most dominant of all time for CPU-controlled players. The biggest problem with trying to contain Shaq in that game is defense isn't strong in the video game to begin with, right? And Shaq will just dunk on you constantly. He'll constantly be catching oops and throwing it down, and you feel absolutely helpless. He would dominate me as well. We used to play co-op and go against him, and it was an absolute nightmare. So I definitely agree with you there as it relates to Shaq in Live 2002. My number one most dominant player that I've ever played against on a basketball video game is Jermaine O'Neal in NBA Live 08 for PS2. He never misses. They pass to him on almost every single possession. He hits guarded shots constantly. I'm not exaggerating when I say I think he put in 92 points on us.
Wow.
In 12-minute quarters. It was like 92 points, and he had like 30 rebounds. It was insane. We were throwing everything at him. We were guarding him with two people, and he was just completely unstoppable. This isn't the prime Jermaine O'Neal, but still, you felt like you were playing the greatest basketball player of all time. In fact, he made us quit a season that we were doing. We were actually doing legends versus regular teams. And I also want to point out when I'm going over my list of players here, we're always playing on the hardest level because we're all usually playing co-op against the computer. And so however dominant a player would be on the default settings, magnify that by like 10, right? When you put it on the hardest level, that player is that much more dominant. And yeah, Jermaine O'Neal's dominance made us quit that season.
That's a good one. Yeah, 92 points from Jermaine O'Neal. And it is a tough combination when you have the hardest difficulty level and a player that still has pretty high ratings. Jermaine O'Neal, not in his prime at that point, coming off a couple of injuries, ratings still fairly high though, still kind of comparable to his prime, hadn't really dropped them yet. Plus, Live 08 has got that weird combination of go-to moves and freestyle superstars. If there's an issue with the primacy rating, which governed the amount of shots players were taking in NBA Live at that time, that generation of NBA Lives, if that primacy rating is a bit too high, players will take too many shots. Combine that with ratings that are still a bit too high. Combine that with the difficult level, ramping up the challenge to an unfair degree. Yeah, it's not that surprising.
He was coming off his last All-Star season in NBA Live 08 because he was an All-Star in 06-07, where he averaged 19.4 points per game and 9.6 rebounds. But the dip in production was significant. That was his last strong year. In 07-08, he averaged 13.6 points, played 42 games. 08-09, he was traded but for that season, he averaged 13.3 points. So the Jermaine O'Neal that we were getting in NBA Live 08 that was so dominant was definitely not your best version. So what's your next choice?
I'd probably have to say Patrick Ewing in NBA 2K11 in the Jordan Challenge. Whenever I play that 1995 game, the double nickel game, Patrick Ewing always seems to kill me. You know, there are many great players represented as opponents in the Jordan Challenge. Dominique Wilkins, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. And they're tough, don't get me wrong, but it always seems to be Patrick Ewing that absolutely dominates me on the virtual hardwood.
It's nice to hear that, too, because I think that big men in NBA 2K10 weren't as dominant as they could be because of the mechanics of that motion system, right? In NBA 2K11, the post game got a bit stronger, and big men could do more. And also, Patrick Ewing was absolutely fantastic at that time. So, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. My next choice is James Harden in NBA 2K14. If you remember correctly, he had already had one season under his belt with the Houston Rockets, and he was an all-star instantly after that trade from OKC. He averaged 25.9 points per game, was 8th in MVP voting, was an all-star, attempted the most free throws per game that year for a player. But
Shocking.
he was, but he became a household name that year. So they were obviously going to make him great in NBA 2K14. Obviously, in the 13-14 season, he once again was an all-star, 5th in MVP voting, averaging 25.4 points per game. But in NBA 2K14, and the version that I'm talking about is not the PC, Xbox 360, PS3 version. I'm talking about the Xbox One, PS4 version. He is just absolutely ridiculous. You play against him on Hall of Fame, and you put hands in his face, and he is just hitting threes on you left and right. He doesn't miss. He routinely puts in 40 or 50 points on my brother and I. When we're using legends and we're draping him on all of his outside shots, he just doesn't seem to miss. He's also incredibly quick, and he throws it down hard. They've always overdone James Harden's athleticism in the NBA 2K games, and 2K14 is no exception. He gets to the rim, you can't stop him. You put defenders all over him on the three-point line, he's smoking threes. He's very good in 2K15 as well, but 2K14, just absolutely ridiculous.
I'd have to agree. Facing him multiple times now over 7 years of my career always seems to score against us. There are some players that are kind of the opposite of what we're talking about here today, that never really seem to dominate in video games as much as they should. Don't take enough shots, or they're a bit too easy to stop. James Harden in 2K14 is one of those players who always gets his numbers, has always lit us up in my career. That's not to say that we haven't got the W at the end of the day, but he's going to get his points.
Yeah, for players that in real life were super dominant, especially as scorers and one-on-one, that they never really were able to capture from a CPU-controlled element in video games. Kobe, Carmelo Anthony, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, and Dirk Nowitzki. I never felt like those guys were going to destroy me in a video game. And I think part of it is because those guys were so great in the mid-range. And I think that video games historically have not done a great job of capturing those types of players in their true element. I think you would agree. You know, it's usually when you think of dominating players, it's, you know, what's been happening with us on NBA 2K9. It's Rudy Gay absolutely destroying us from beyond the arc, right?
Yeah.
Or with dunks, or Gilbert Arenas absolutely destroying us beyond the arc for 52 points in the last game that we played. But then also getting downhill, and it's either a layup or a dunk. It's never in the mid-range. So again, Kobe, Melo, T-Mac, Carter, and Dirk just never felt like video games captured those players appropriately.
Agreed, and that is kind of disappointing when that happens, because sure, it's nice to not be dominated by them, I suppose. It's nice to be able to contend with them, but you want those players to be tough, especially when other players who shouldn't be lighting you up do. So, my next one would have to be Chris Juhan in NBA Live 10. And NBA Live 10 has kind of a point guard domination issue, at least to some extent, and Chris Juhan playing against him on 12-minute quarters, it was always as if he was one of the absolute best point guards in the league. Admittedly, I don't remember him dropping 50 or 60 on me, but I do recall him a few times going off for 35, 45 points, along with 10, 15 assists. Chris Juwan would always have that huge double-double when I played against him in NBA Live 10.
Yeah, and it's always frustrating when it's not a star, or even like a really good scorer in the league, like Kevin Martin, right? Like if you get lit up by Kevin Martin, it's like, well, you know what? Kevin Martin wasn't a superstar, but he could average 20 points per game. He did average 20 points per game, right? And he did light up teams despite not having that superstar status. But when you see it like being like a guy like Chris Duhon, right? Or you're getting absolutely demolished by a guy like Delonte West. And it's not a shot on players like that. It's just they weren't all-stars, right?
Yeah.
They weren't elite scorers. It just makes it that much worse when it's happening. And, we've had many instances of that where my brother and I are using legends and we're playing against regular teams. And it's a guy like Steve Blake who hits like 6 or 7 threes in a quarter. And it's like, come on, right? Steve Blake is absolutely destroying us. But yeah, NBA Live 10 was one of those games that if you didn't allow a CPU defender to play the defense on the CPU and you tried to stick to that guard, a lot of times the mechanics didn't allow you to stick to him, right? And the moment you let that guy get downhill, it was over. He would automatically shoot and he would score most of the time. And if they got any good look at all from three, they would also hit it. So that was tough with that game. We also go through that in our NBA 2K9 season. If we overplay on the point guard, what happens? They dive, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden we're scrambling to try to get, defenders over there to protect the rim. And before we know it, they're scoring. And if we underplay, they're shooting over us. So NBA 2K9, that's a tough balance. And sometimes during our season, our Bulls Association, I have to pick and choose my spots where I'm actually going to guard that point guard.
Yeah, and I usually don't try at all unless I'm just switching and happen to accidentally switch to the point guard, because with my connection, trying to keep up with them, even with the defensive assist, is, well, I'm going to give up a bucket. So I try to avoid it.
Next for me is Paul Pierce in NBA Inside Drive 2003. He was the cover athlete, Andrew, and we've talked about this before on prior NLSC episodes. Sometimes they are very generous with the cover athlete's abilities on the basketball floor. And I just got to tell you, Paul Pierce in that game is just absolutely unstoppable. He never misses. He's super quick, throws it down, but really it's his shooting. I just feel like he never misses an outside shot. And you can be using an elite defender against him, and he is just hitting absolutely everything. So yeah, Paul Pierce, NBA Inside Drive 2003.
And even though he is overdone, it is nice to see a player of Paul Pierce's stature actually be capable of being dominant, because as you said, you can kind of accept it if it is a star, if it is somebody who can light you up, when it is a Steve Blake hitting 6 or 7 threes in a quarter. And look, crazy things happen in the NBA, and that's what people like to point to. Oh, what about this? If this happened in a video game, people would complain. But it's the frequency at which it happens.
Volume matters.
Volume and context, absolutely. So, I talked about point guard domination in NBA Live 10. It's also an issue in NBA Live 06. As much as I love those games, it is one of the weaker points of the AI. And I could say pretty much any point guard on any given night playing through my dynasty in NBA Live 06. But one that stands out is Steve Nash. And of course, Steve Nash, Hall of Fame player, great player, MVP at the time, but not a huge scorer night in and night out. But he would knife into the lane, he'd finish with ease. Much like Chris Juwan, he'd get all the assists as well, although, of course, with Steve Nash, that was a bit more realistic to say the least. But yeah, I remember Steve Nash killing me in NBA Live 06 PC.
I mean, I like to see that too. At least it's Steve Nash.
Yes.
Right. And we've been watching a lot of classic games lately, a lot from the early 2000s, even before he joined the Suns, the Dallas Mavericks version of Steve Nash. And it's just unbelievable how good he was. The ball on the string, the shots on the move. Like he said, he could have averaged more points in his career. And he actually said that was one of his regrets about his NBA career is that he didn't shoot more. You watch him play and you feel like he could have averaged 30 points per game if he wanted to, just the way he could get to his spots, his high shooting percentage from, all over the floor, 3-point percentage, regular field goals around the rim, his free throw shooting. Just what an incredible player. So I think I'd be okay a little bit more with Steve Nash kicking my butt on the virtual hardwood.
Oh, that's true. Absolutely. And again, it's not completely unrealistic that he'd do so. I think it was more annoying to me because it would take away from the dominance of players like Amare or Sean Marion. You wouldn't see them having a big game against you because it was Steve Nash taking a few too many shots, taking shots away from them. So it's more about other players not being dominant when they really should have been.
Yeah, I think that can get frustrating with games, especially games like NBA Live 98. You'll go against the Jazz, and they'll barely give the ball to Karl Malone. It's like, why, right? Yeah. He's their best scorer, and John Stockton is taking all of the shots, or at least the majority of them. And there's been a lot of situations like that in the past, and that's such a turnoff when you're playing against the CPU and you're trying to play like a realistic season and whatnot. I could come up with countless examples of players not being used appropriately. One of them is Dirk. Like, you play against Dirk in video games, and most of the time the computer isn't even using him. Yeah. They're barely going to him. And similar for players like Amare Stoudemire, Dwight Howard in many different titles. They're not even going to these guys. So, that's where roster editing can come in with the newest games, where you can turn up things like shot tendency, right? Change things like dish to open man, change a bunch of the, tendencies and attributes to suit that player getting the ball more, even change some of the playbooks. So when the CPU is running plays, they're going to that play more often. So we try to mess with that stuff.
Oh, it's absolutely vital, yeah. That reminds me, have you ever played against the 86 Celtics in NBA 2K14 for PlayStation 4 or Xbox One?
I have not.
If you do, you'll notice Larry Bird is not Larry Bird. He should shoot way more often. He should be a much bigger problem, but he's kind of like Dirk in that respect, where you don't really have to worry about him.
Yeah, and that kills the experience, right? Because then in that case, it's like Danny Ainge and Dennis Johnson taking the most shots.
Pretty much, yeah.
And that's unrealistic. And it's like, well, this isn't a realistic experience, so why would I be playing against the CPU right now? That's usually when I turn a game off or just, play a different team.
Yeah, exactly. I will say, playing with Larry Bird in 2K14 for PS4, that is absolutely a joy. He can play like himself in your hands, but yeah, not in the CPUs.
He plays a lot better in NBA 2K14 than he does on the newest 2Ks.
Fair.
On the newest 2Ks, he's an absolute slug. Shooting is so broken in so many ways in the newest games that you can't shoot like Larry either, right? So, using him in the newest games, in my opinion, is super frustrating and unrealistic. And playing against him is the same. Let's go to another point guard for my next choice. Damian Lillard in NBA 2K26. From my experience playing on the hardest level, either playing against him with a regular NBA team or using Legends with my brother, Damian Lillard is way better than Steph Curry. He's far better than any other point guard in that game. Steph Curry, when you play against him in 2K26, and it was the same with 2K25, he takes a lot of stupid shots. Like, if there is any sign of daylight, they make Curry fire. And you're easily able to get there, put a hand up. You can make Steph Curry shoot a miserable percentage, even on the hardest level, on NBA 2K25 and 2K26. But Damian Lillard has better shot selection, and he also hits more guarded shots, it feels like, in NBA 2K26. He absolutely gives me fits. I've played against the Trailblazers using many different NBA teams in Play Now. We've also played against them using the Legends. And Damian Lillard is such a nightmare to guard because he's always finding a way to get open and he's always hitting his shots. So, yeah, another point guard who is actually a hell of a scorer in real life, but in my opinion, overdone in NBA 2K26.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least it is realistic in that he is a great player. He is a dynamic scorer who's had 50-point games and so forth. But yeah, it just turned up a little bit too much, a little too strong on the virtual hardwood. I've noticed that in 2K14 as well. And to your point, he's more dangerous than Steph Curry in that game. And I know Steph Curry wasn't quite the Steph Curry we know him as in the 2014 season. It was his first All-Star season. I started out my career with the Vault rosters, so he isn't as powerful as he perhaps should be, but Lillard is definitely the superior player in that game. I've faced him twice in the NBA Finals in that my career, and this is kind of a sidebar as far as performance that's not realistic. If I have one regret about my 2K14 my career so far, it's that the teams coming out of the West, all 6 years so far, I'm in my 7th season now, all 6 NBA Finals that I've been to have been against teams that were underdogs. Every year it's been an underdog run coming out of the West. And that's interesting, and obviously that does happen, but I'm yet to face the top team in the West. There's always been an upset at some point, whether it's been in the first round, sometimes in the Western Conference Finals, so I'm still waiting for that really strong opponent to come out of the West. And again, it's novel, it is something that happens in real life, but it's the frequency, it's the volume, it's the context, and that's important.
Some strange programming there, right? Because that falls under programming.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they wanted it to look like that, or maybe it was a complete oversight, and they didn't sim enough. So that is definitely strange. I just thought of one other player that video games have never been able to get right, never been able to make him accurate, is Allen Iverson. And it's funny because Allen Iverson was the face of NBA 2K video games all the way up through, ESPN NBA 2K4. And, he operated so much in the mid-range and operated so much below the rim when he drove that I just think games could never get him right. I never feared Allen Iverson in a video game, really. Like, I never played against Allen Iverson and thought, oh, my God, I got to be careful, or he's going to light me up, or he's going to score 50. And I find that disappointing because he was a fantastic player who could score in so many different ways. But, yeah, games just never got him right.
Yeah, another player that you can dominate with. You can play well with him, be Allen Iverson, put up those numbers, but facing him just doesn't feel as dangerous. And I think another issue there is speed differentiation. Allen Iverson should be so much faster than a majority of the other players on the court, but he's not. He doesn't really stand out, even with maxed out speed ratings.
Yeah, not only that, he was so good at finishing in traffic on contact. Right. And contorting his body and all of that stuff on his finishes. And it's really tough for video games to get that right, especially during his heyday and whatnot. And I'm going to point out, too, that on NBA 2K9, that's something that I think they did a pretty good job of getting right with guys like Derrick Rose and whatnot. How many times have we driven to the hoop and, he's adjusted his shot in traffic and put it off the glass and in, or drove baseline and, double pumped a reverse layup, or used his body on contact jumping into a defender. I think that those animations, just the way that works in general in that game, is superior even to like NBA 2K26, a game that came out, 17 years later. We've just had some breathtaking finishes with Rose around traffic and on defenders.
Agreed. You had an up and under in the last game we played against the Wizards that was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and you'll see that probably in a future NLSC Top 10.
And this is a recent one because I've been playing this game to cover it for Wayback Wednesday this week, actually. This retrospective will be out tomorrow. In NBA Jam 99, not a strong game, to say the least, and I will go into more detail in my retrospective, but I played the Utah Jazz. And this goes back to your point about the wrong players taking the most shots, and the Jazz being a common example with Karl Malone not taking enough shots, and it either being John Stockton or someone else. And it was someone else in this case, and it was Jeff Hornacek. And Jeff Hornacek was a one-time All-Star. Before he went to the Jazz, 20 points per game scorer. Jeff Hornacek was a fine player, but I just could not stop him. And he was taking the most shots, knocking down pretty much all of them. Now, once again, NBA Jam 99, not a strong game. They made that switch to that sim arcade hybrid, or tried to. It wasn't very good. Spoilers for the retrospective. But yeah, this has happened in other games that have point guard or shooting guard domination, not the right shot distribution. But players like Jeff Hornacek, as an NBA Jam 99, just often going off for 30, 40 points, taking the most shots, not necessarily doing it the most efficiently, although he was in that particular game. Yeah, Jeff Hornacek stands out as a recent example for me.
The aging player dominating can get so frustrating, especially when in real life they've lost some of that ability, or they're not as much of the go-to guy. They're not as fast. They're not as strong, etc. So Hornacek, NBA Jam 99 would be based off of the 98-99 season, more than likely. He averaged 12.2 points that season, 29.9 minutes a game, played 48 games, and shot 42% from three, which is absolutely excellent. By the way, his career three-point percentage in 14 years was 40.3. And in his last season with the Jazz, in 99-2000, he played 77 games, Andrew, and he shot 47.8 from three. That is some knockdown shooting right there. But yeah, the aging players that just absolutely light you up. Oftentimes, Jeff Hornacek's not a good example of this because he was a starter, but oftentimes it being a benched aged legend as well. So, I'm sure that got frustrating.
It did, and that game is very frustrating in general. Once again, I'll go into more detail in my retrospective. But yeah, having Jeff Hornacek light you up, which, not totally unrealistic, maybe should happen from time to time, but again, Karl Malone should have been taking most of the shots. And yeah, it is frustrating when that aging star can still light you up, but for someone like a Karl Malone, someone who is one of the all-time great scorers, you can kind of deal with it.
Games never really got Karl Malone or Charles Barkley right in the few that Charles Barkley was in. It feels like their games weren't suited for those video game mechanics.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
The next name I want to bring up is Giannis in NBA 2K19 on both ends. His defense in that game, it doesn't matter how good the offensive player is that you're using. You can't go one-on-one with him. He's blocking you wherever you go, like body blocking you. He's so fast laterally. He's so fast up and down the court. If you actually get a first step on him and you try to go up and score, he's going to block you probably 90% of the time, and the other 10% he's making you miss. It is hell playing against Giannis, especially on the higher levels in NBA 2K19. And once again, what is Giannis, Andrew? He's the cover athlete for that game. And then offensively, good luck, because if he's charging the rim, he is so fast and he finishes so fast that you can't do anything about it. You want to try to post him up, even with a guy like, I don't know, Shaq, or, a current good big. Maybe you're posting up on him with Joel Embiid and there's a switch or whatnot. Yeah, you're not going to score. He's absolutely going to stop you. You can try to drop step. You can try other moves around the rim. Good luck, because you're more than likely not going to score. And his dominance, especially on the defensive end, has just continued from NBA 2K19, all the way up to 2K26 for the most part. But yeah, it was his dominance on both ends of the floor in NBA 2K19, which just made him absolutely unstoppable.
And again, an example of it being realistic, in as much as Giannis is a great player at both ends, very difficult to contend with, but a bit exaggerated. So you can kind of stomach it, but at the same time, there's a lot of frustration there when there's absolutely nothing you can do. So I want to throw kind of an odd one out there, but I'm sure you'll agree. Blake Griffin in that NBA Jam on Fire Edition road trip challenge where dunks count for 4 points. That was so frustrating.
Well, you can't block him, really, right? Like when he goes up and he throws it down, you're just bouncing off of him. I believe we lost that challenge multiple times, and we don't usually lose, by the way, even on the hardest challenges. But we lost that challenge multiple times, and I remember being in the chat stating, again, we have to try it again. Yeah. I know you missed that. We got to get back to that road trip.
Yep.
But I just didn't want to give up. I just felt like Blake Griffin was impossible to stop He went up so quick and he came down so hard, and bodies would just go flying and he would throw it down on you. So that's a good one. I like that choice.
And I'm drawing a blank here. Who's the teammate in that game? Was that Danny Manning?
Yeah, it might have been. I know that it wasn't DeAndre Jordan. But I also remember Danny Manning, and we were talking about it in the chat. I remember him lighting us up from three in another challenge. I think we were talking about it. It's like Danny Manning could step out there and hit a three once in a while, but he shouldn't be lighting us up like he's Kyle Korver. And I remember he was destroying us from three. Do you remember that?
I do. And it's funny because Danny Manning in NBA Jam Tournament Edition has a 7 for three-pointers. Kind of the replacement for Charles Barkley in that game, I suppose, and maybe gave him some of Chuck's abilities or exaggerated abilities to kind of stand in for Chuck, because you had, Kevin Johnson, Dan Marley as the other players by default. I think AC Green was the unlockable player in NBA Jam Tournament Edition from memory, the PC version anyway. But yeah, Danny Manning kind of exaggerated ratings in NBA Jam TE, especially because he sat out most of the 95 season due to injury.
You know, what's funny is he's a career 20% three-point shooter, and the year that NBA Jam Tournament Edition is based off of is actually 94-95, and that his three-point percentage that year was 28.6% on 0.5 attempts per game. And 93-94, when he was an all-star, he shot 17% from three on 0.3 attempts per game. So he should absolutely not be lighting us up ever. But I just remember on OFE that we were having trouble with him because he was smoking threes all over the place.
And of course, when we talk about weird three-point ratings in NBA Jam and NBA Jam Tournament Edition, I always have to bring up Dino Raja with a 9 and Juwan Howard with a 9. That was based on absolutely nothing.
Both guys that lived in the mid-range and were good back to the basket and around the rim guys. But yeah, they were definitely not three-point shooters. Next for me is Ray Allen in early 2010s NBA 2Ks. Pick one. It doesn't matter. NBA 2K 10, 11, 12, 13. He would just light you up all over the floor. Deep threes, contested threes. It didn't matter. And what's funny is he was far better, from my experience, in the early 2010s NBA 2Ks, which was towards the end of his career, than he ever was in his prime, right? In the video games from the early 2000s, mid 2000s, etc. Just absolutely lights out from three.
And Ray Allen is kind of the opposite of like Larry Bird in 2K14, where you can play better with him than he'll ever play against you, because in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you still have the dice roll for shooting. There isn't any green releases in most games. Some games, like the NBA series, the Sony exclusives, they did have that green release, but a lot of games, live in 2K in particular, didn't. So you'd get screwed over constantly by that dice roll, never really shooting quite like Ray Allen. Freestyle Superstars in NBA Live 06, PC and Last Gen did help out a little bit there, but the CPU would always be able to knock down those shots, always get that favorable dice roll, tilt things in their favor. Yeah, Ray Allen's a good shout here.
So lastly, before we get to the community's responses, I have one more mention, and this only has to do with their defense in this video game. Wemby, Anthony Davis, Chet Holmgren, Giannis, Joel Embiid, and Jaren Jackson Jr. in NBA 2K26. If you play that game on the higher levels, we play it on Hall of Fame. Scoring on those guys is nearly impossible on every single possession. You can't beat them off the dribble most of the time, and if you do, they're still getting that canned block. If you try to take them back to the basket, it doesn't matter if you're trying to drop step. It doesn't matter if you try to spin each way. It doesn't matter if you're trying to hook over them. You are either getting blocked or you're basically guaranteed a miss no matter what. And there's probably no green window. We play without the shot meter, but from watching videos online of how that works and everything, as far as the contest system, there is probably no green window that even shows up. So you're basically guaranteed a miss trying to score on those guys. They run the floor incredibly well. They move their feet incredibly well. And because of the badges in that game and all the canned moments, you basically just can't even get a good look on them ever. They are so overpowered. Like I said on a prior podcast, if you play against the Thunder, you're better off trying to attack Hartenstein. If you're against Milwaukee, try to pick on guys like Kyle Kuzma. If you're against the Dallas Mavericks, go at Cooper Flagg or Derek Lively. If you're playing against the Spurs, just do whatever you possibly can to stay away from Wemby and go at Harrison Barnes or somebody else, etc. Just those guys are ridiculously dominant and not in a realistic or good way on the defensive end on NBA 2K26. And I think that that's something that the developers need to figure out, how to make those guys more realistic on the defensive end. You can still make them good. You can still make them dominant at times, but not missing every shot on the highest levels.
Kind of reminds me a bit of going against Yao Ming in a lot of games from the 2000s.
Yeah, and I don't even think he was close to as dominant as they are in NBA 2K26. I agree with you that Yao Ming, especially because of his height, if you tried to go up on him, sometimes you would get stifled. But these guys, you probably don't even get to 10% shooting being contested by those guys. It's like there's no chance you're going to hit that shot. Even with some of the best scorers or the best scorers in the NBA, even if you're using legends against them, it's absolutely ridiculous.
And I'll also throw out one last one here. Jason Kidd, so far in our 2K9 association, again, a great
what
player.
was up with that?
Yeah, a great player.
He put in like 40-something points on us and had, I want to say, like 20 assists, but he was shooting like fadeaway threes. And this is the old Dallas Mavericks version, not the young Dallas Mavericks version that could fly up and down the court and throw it down and all that stuff. This is the, towards the end of his career, Jason Kidd hitting fadeaway contested threes and sideaway contested threes on us.
Yeah, and obviously he became a better shooter over the course of his career. The whole Ace kid, that kid ain't got a J, that was the whole thing in his early Dallas days, in his first run with the Mavericks. So he could shoot later on in his career, but not to that extent. And he wasn't likely to do that. Again, did he have the skill to do it? Sure, but it goes back to your point that Dirk should have been the one absolutely destroying us. And Dirk did have his moments in that game, if I recall correctly, but it was Jason Kidd that we couldn't stop.
Yeah, there's also an honorable mention that I want to bring up is Kevin Durant in NBA 2K15. Again, the cover athlete, right? But my God, does he never miss. In that game, we played against Kevin Durant using legends, and he just absolutely lit us up. 50-something points, I think, on us, and he was just hitting shots from all over the court, and he's so fast, and his dribbling is so good, and he's finishing at the rim almost every single time. That's another honorable mention. So let's get to the community responses. I asked basketball gamers which CPU-controlled players were overpowering on the virtual hardwood. Example, Rudy Gay in 2K9. If you have a story related to a specific game, please share. So let's get to Twitter responses first. Roger Ward, Live01 Legend, states, Yao and Shaq in Live 04, KG in Live 01, and Harden in 2K19. Yes, Harden in 2K19 hardly ever misses from the floor, and of course they way overdid his athleticism rating, so he's throwing it down on you and whatnot. KG in Live 01 was one of my honorable mentions as well. Obviously, once again, the cover athlete for that game, Andrew, and he's definitely dominant. He mentions Yao and Shaq in Live 04. And it's not their offense for me. It's the fact that that game is absolutely loaded and flooded with canned blocks, especially on the higher difficulty levels. And if you try to take it in on Shaq or Yao or another big guy that has good defensive ratings, expect that canned block animation. It is going to be sent back. And I think that was a flaw in that game. I think that game had way too many canned animations, and I understand that it was the first NBA Live with the 10-man freestyle.
Yep.
And whatnot. But yeah, they definitely overdid it in that regard.
Yeah, and that was an important innovation to bring in that 10-man freestyle, to not have those tin cans bumping into each other physics of previous games. We saw that in Live 2003, but it did have some teething problems, without a doubt. And it wasn't balanced, because Shaq could go up against you and dunk all over you, you try and go up with Shaq, and you get forced into that adjusted layup when you really should be overpowering the defense. Wasn't balanced in that regard. But yeah, trying to drive on those players, you were getting swatted, or you were getting forced into that awkward adjusted animation. And of course you could manually adjust for a slightly higher percentage adjusted shot. But yeah, definitely some teething problems with that first iteration of 10-man freestyle. And KG in Live 2001, we've had Roger and Nate on the show a few times now talking about the mechanics of NBA Live 2001. They are the Live 01 legends. They know that game like the back of their hands. And they've talked about how, with the jumping ratings, when they're overdone, you just can't stop those players almost jumping into the rafters for dunks. And KG does have that really high jumping rating. So yeah, very tough to stop once he gets into the paint.
I love the dunks on NBA Live 2001 where the players' head and shoulders are way above the rim.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously super unrealistic. Obviously, if that happened in the newest NBA 2Ks, it would be blasted on social media and people would be saying, oh my God, look how stupid this is and everything. But for some reason in that game, I just love when it happens. I remember one of the first highlights that I put in the NLSC Top 10 Plays of the Week from the Live 01 Legends was a Grant Hill dunk like that, where it's like his chest is at the rim. He is just so high up and he threw it down. And I want to say it was that highlight that had me message them on Instagram and state, hey guys, can I use this for the NLSC Top 10 Plays of the Week? And then, they became friends of mine and whatnot. And so, those dunks, I find them hilarious and I actually like them in that game. Next is the other Live 01 legend, Stasho Bro at Nate Stasho states, I remember Ben Wallace getting 20 rebounds against me in a game of NBA Live 2005 back when I was a kid. I was down 1 at the end of the game, and Wallace had the ball 30-plus feet out with the shot clock running down, and the CPU pulls up and makes a 3 with him. I rage quit immediately. Yeah, if you have Ben Wallace hitting threes in video games, whether it's early in the game, at the end of the shot clock, or a game winner and everything, that is going to be enough to have anybody rage quit. So I don't blame him there.
And again, it's one of those situations where someone might say, oh, this happens in real life. And look, you could pull up some footage of Ben Wallace hitting one of the threes that he did in his career, 7 over the course of his career, heaves and so forth. I don't actually remember seeing him hit the threes, but I'm guessing most of them were kind of to beat the shot clock or just heaves or whatever that went in, not a play over his shooting touch, obviously. So yeah, it's one of those situations where you could bring up, oh, this happens. Kind of like when Vince Carter hit that half-court 3 on me in Ultimate Team with Tim Duncan draped all over him. Could it happen? Sure, but context is important. The CPU doing it as a middle finger, yeah, that does make you rage quit. So I absolutely get where he's coming from there.
I mean, at least it was Vince Carter in your case.
Yeah, a bit better.
If you remember correctly, a super uninspiring player, at least from my viewing, when he was with the Celtics, Milt Palacio, they were calling him Miracle Milt for a while because he hit a couple game winners.
Yeah.
With the Celtics completely off balance, one of them like off of one leg falling down. Right. So those shots do happen. And a lot of times they happen from players that aren't stars or aren't great 3-point shooters. So they do happen in real life. But at the same time, when it happens in a video game, especially a competitive one, like he stated, it was at the end of the shot clock or at the end of the game and whatnot. For some reason, it feels 10 times worse.
Yeah, I think it's something that's very difficult to represent accurately in a sim game. Are those lucky moments? Because it always feels like the CPU is screwing you over or something's gone wrong. It should happen, but frequency matters, context matters, volume matters, as you said. Just very hard to depict on the virtual hardwood.
T Gentry at Bucky_T states, always those little guys. As I mentioned to you before, Nate Robinson, 2K9, and also 2K13 through 2K15, Spud Webb, 2K25 and 2K26, Jameer Nelson, 2K14, and yes, screw Jameer Nelson in 2K14, Andrew. He would absolutely light me up. I don't know if you had that experience during my career or whatnot, but yeah, Jameer Nelson, it felt like he killed me every single game. He continues. Have to mention Rudy Gay, NBA 2K9 as well. We mentioned him earlier. Paul George in 2K14 through 16, and Gerald Green 2K13 through 2K25. Out of everyone that he mentioned, the Jameer Nelson one stands out to me from NBA 2K14, Xbox One, PS4.
I feel like that has happened in a couple of games against the Magic in 2K14. Although the Magic, at this point in my career, have actually signed Dwayne Wade and are playing him at point guard, and he's actually still quite dominant as of the virtual 2020 season, so he's kind of taken over for Nelson at this point. But yeah, I do remember a couple of games where he was pretty tough. And Paul George, Gerald Green, players who can both slash and shoot, and of course they are a tough guard in real life, but it's always been exaggerated in video games because how do you play them? What can you do when the CPU can either blow by you with ease or knock down shots in your face?
I always felt Gerald Green was far better to use than play against. Like I felt like he never really killed me in those games. But if you use Gerald Green in 2K13 through 2K15, you could hit threes with him. You could throw it down on people constantly. You could get to the hoop with ease. I actually uploaded a gameplay video. You might remember this for NBA 2K14 on my Xbox One when I was playing Blacktop, and I was just absolutely schooling the computer with Gerald Green. Just fantastic dunks. He's great at finishing around the rim, and like I said, you can hit threes with him.
Pretty good in 2K7 as well.
Desmond Powell at Desmond Powell _ states, 2K11 Terrence Williams stayed cooking me in Summer League. 2K19 Steph and Clay were a headache until I realized, 1, get Steph in foul trouble, plus 2, focus playing tight off-ball defense instead of answering their shots with points of my own, LOL. Also, D-Book doesn't miss in 2K26. I agree, Devin Booker doesn't miss much in the newest 2Ks in general. It was the same in 2K25. Terrence Williams is interesting. He was the ringleader in the case where he and others defrauded the NBA's health plan. I believe that a couple former players, including him, are doing time in prison for that right now. But what I remember of Terrence Williams is a short stint in 12-13 with the Boston Celtics. He played 24 games with the Celtics, 13.3 minutes a game. And Tom Heinsohn just absolutely loved the idea of having him on the team. He was constantly talking about his potential, his size for his position, his floor vision, because he was running a lot of point for us and playing shooting guard 6'6", 220. And I was just overall underwhelmed with him. He did seem like a player that had a lot going for him, had a lot of potential. With the Celtics, he shot 49.5% from the floor in those 24 games and did give us some good moments. But yeah, underwhelming in the NBA. And he was out of the NBA after that season at age 25. I do remember him being a little bit too good in video games because of that potential, because of that size, because he could do multiple things on the floor.
Reminds me a lot of Darius Miles in NBA Live 2003. Some exaggerated ratings based on potential, if nothing else. He was one of the players to get in a franchise, NBA Live 2003, Darius Miles. Yeah, I looked it up, actually sentenced to 10 years in prison back in 2023, Terrence Williams. And Desmond mentions getting Steph in foul trouble. And yeah, that is a really good way to shut down the CPU, get them into foul trouble. Of course, at the top of the show, I mentioned Shaq dropping 73 points on me in NBA Live 2002. In NBA Live 2003, they added the take charge button. So I once held him to 6 points a year later because I had that ability to take the charges, to flop, not just with Vlade, but other players as well, get him into foul trouble, get him off the court, and yeah, that was a way to hold him under 10 points.
Well, it's his second point that is the most effective, because sometimes it is hard to get a player in foul trouble in video games.
Yeah.
Right. But he states playing tight off-ball defense instead of answering their shots with points of my own. The playing tight off-ball defense is so important because oftentimes in video games you can make it so that player never even catches the ball. Right. If you're blocking that passing lane, if you're sticking to him close. I know there's a lot of pride when I play video games where it's like I always want to guard the ball. You see it in the 2K9 season that we're playing, right? With the Bulls. You can see I'm always trying to guard the ball because I have pride there, and it's like I want to shut him down. I want to make him miss, etc. But sometimes with players like Clay, with players like Steph, etc., you need to let go of that pride and you need to control an off-ball defender and make it so you interrupt the plays they're running for those guys. Because oftentimes in video games, like 2K19, 2K26, etc., if you're not doing that, the AI defense is not good enough to thwart that play call, not good enough to stay with that offensive player. And then all of a sudden, you can't get to that guy when he gets the ball, and he goes into his shot immediately. And in NBA 2K19 and NBA 2K26, guys like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, he mentioned Devin Booker in 2K26, guys like Kevin Durant in Houston, etc. When they catch the ball, they go right into their shot. And if you're late getting to them, it's over. So, yeah, tight off-ball defense is incredibly important.
Absolutely. And, of course, when you're playing online head-to-head, it is the done thing to guard the ball handler rather than letting the CPU do it. It's different when you're going against the CPU and you have that disadvantage of the CPU having better reaction speed, etc. And speaking about 2K9 association, I do try to guard the weakest player whenever I can, try to guard on the weak side, rotate and help if I can, because of my input lag. But in the last game we played against the Wizards, I was trying to guard Etan Thomas and Brendan Haywood, because I thought, this will be an easier cover. And yet they were putting the ball on the floor, getting by me, and getting to the bucket. And I was feeling a bit embarrassed about letting us down. And then there was a play where, I don't know if it was Etan Thomas or Brendan Haywood, but one of them got by you and scored. And I felt a little bit better. I'm like, I don't completely suck.
I think the thing is that those guys in real life could get a first step on you. I want to give an example. We were watching a game from the 2002 NBA playoffs. And here the Kings are, they bring in Scott Pollard. And Scott Pollard was absolutely killing his defender to the hoop. He was catching the ball on the high post, putting the ball on the floor, and driving hard. You can see guys like Etan Thomas doing that. You can at times see Brendan Haywood even go downhill and whatnot. So it's not really unrealistic. I think video games get that wrong most of the time. These guys are unbelievable athletes. They're NBA players, etc. They can move like that. So, if I get beat by a guy like Etan Thomas, and maybe I jumped out because I was worried he was going to hit a mid-range shot on me. Maybe I disrespected him and, he took advantage of that and whatever. That doesn't really bother me. Where it would bother me is if Etan Thomas or Brendan Haywood did that on me all game, right? And at the end of the game, Etan Thomas had like 30 points and most of them were on slashes from the perimeter. That would be unrealistic. But yeah, that didn't bother me.
Yeah, fortunately neither of them lit us up like that for 30 or 40. But are you saying, Derek, that players from back in the day had skill and athleticism?
I don't even want to get into that. There's just all these shots at the past NBA and past athletes and everything. It's just getting so old that it's draining. So I don't really even want to talk about that. But
Fair.
Yeah, Pollard, underdone in video games based on what I watch and, on these classic games and from what I remember of him as a player. And yeah, he can do a lot actually on the court as far as like attacking the rim and finishing around the rim. Kung Pao Enjoyer at Shrek2 Fanboy states 2K13. KD on Hall of Fame was just broken for me. And yeah, Durant is ridiculous in those games. 2K13, 2K14, 2K15, especially on the higher levels, like he mentions Hall of Fame. He just doesn't miss. He is flying up and down the court. His defense is incredible, and he's finishing constantly at the rim. Moving over to Discord, Shamgod states OJ Mayo in 2K13. And yeah, I can remember a couple of video games where OJ Mayo was ridiculous. And an honorable mention to Monta Ellis. I think you might remember Monta Ellis is super hard to stop sometimes in video games. It feels like he hits everything. He shoots threes better than he did in real life, etc. But yeah, those professional scorers, sometimes they did get them right in video games. But OJ Mayo, I do remember being overpowering in 2K13.
Yeah, and Kevin Durant, obviously a multi-talented scorer, one of the best scorers in NBA history, so it is realistic to some extent, but the CPU can definitely exaggerate it in the name of being challenging. And yeah, I remember OJ Mayo being one of the big names being discussed leading up to the 2008 draft. I remember him being one of those players mentioned a couple of years before he was drafted as this future star. Didn't really become the case, of course, got banned from the NBA, but in video games, yeah, absolute superstar.
Glep states Ramon Sessions in 2K12. That guy always made first team, and I still never know why. I had a different experience with Ramon Sessions in video game history, whether it was 2K12, 13, 14, 15, etc. It always felt like I would look forward to him coming into the game. And if he was starting, I would always look forward to playing against him right off the bat because he wasn't a good enough three-point shooter, and you could sag off of him. Oftentimes, you could steal the ball from him, and he would also overshoot. So he would shoot more than he should, and he would miss more often than not. He could be talking about in a sim setting where Ramon Session, would get accolades, awards, maybe put up better numbers. And maybe his experience too was different with Ramon Sessions. Maybe he did get lit up by him. But I always looked forward to playing against Ramon Sessions because I felt he was limited in the video games, shot too much, and you could take advantage of him.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic as well. The players that always did better in simulation than they really should. And one that comes to mind for me there is Bo Outlaw in ESPN NBA Tonight. Covered that last year in Way Back Wednesday. And he always leads the league in scoring. He can lead the Magic to the 2001 NBA Championship pretty much consistently in simulation. And Bo Outlaw, Summer League legend, obviously. But yeah, definitely overdone in the sim engine of ESPN NBA Tonight.
Juicy Shack Meat states, for me, it's Jason Richardson in 2K14 last gen, so he's talking about PC, PS3, and Xbox 360. He can shoot from everywhere. No stopping him at all, despite supposedly being past his prime. Those are the toughest players sometimes to guard in the game, are the ones that can knock it down from free at a super high clip, are super fast, and then also easily get to the rim and finish constantly. It's like those players are super tough to deal with, and Jason Richardson is definitely one of them. And similar to like what I mentioned earlier, guys like Gerald Green. Gerald Green, they made him too good at three-point shooting oftentimes in the video games, and you just couldn't stop him going downhill.
That actually reminds me, I need to correct myself from earlier in the show when I said that Shaq 73 was the most points ever dropped on me. Jason Richardson in NBA Live 09 for PlayStation 2 did score over 100 on me in a 12-minute quarters. Just could not stop him.
100.
Over 100.
He broke Wilt Chamberlain's record, and you didn't mention him earlier in the show. That's crazy, but not surprising because, again, he is overdone in video games.
I suppose it's because I haven't played NBA Live 09 for PS2 as much as other games, or maybe I simply blocked it out of my memory because of the embarrassment.
So those are responses on Discord and Twitter. I believe that we have responses on Facebook.
Yes, we did have a few people weigh in on Facebook as well. Carl says, Jerry West in NBA Live 2000, Mr. Clutch could not be contained. And of course, the legends added in NBA Live 2000, Jerry West among them. Yeah, that's cool that he was playing against the 60s All-Stars, and Jerry West certainly should be tough to cover, but yeah, an interesting example.
Yeah, you know who's a great legend to use in past video games, specifically past NBA Lives, is Rick Barry. It's like using another Larry Bird as far as shooting. You can just hit contested shots all over the place. He's lights out from three. Same with Pete Maravich, lights out from three. Excellent shooter in the old NBA Lives. So yeah, Rick Barry, Pete Maravich, excellent to use, not fun to play against sometimes.
And as I mentioned in a recent article, I'm actually really enjoying playing with and against those older players in recent times. While I've always respected those players in real life, when it comes to video games, I've usually played with the players that I grew up watching, the ones that I have nostalgia for specifically. Players who began their careers in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s, as the case may be. But yeah, I've actually really been enjoying going back and playing with those legends from before my time. Selvin says, in NBA 2K11, Durant gave me 75 in a playoff game. Again, Kevin Durant, multi-talented scorer. What do they call it these days? 3-level scorer? But yeah, very tough to contend with a player like Kevin Durant when he's made properly.
Yeah, and the Thunder themselves in 2K11, 2K12, 2K13, 2K14, 2K15, 2K16, the lives around that time as well, they are just so tough to deal with, right? Because of Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant and just the way they can score in those video games and the way they get up and down the court. And, you know, on many of those teams, you also have Serge Ibaka or Serge Ibaka, who's protecting the rim and whatnot. So, yeah, I think that those teams, those Thunder teams in general, CPU controlled, are really tough to face in those games.
Octopus says, Monte Ellis in 2K10. That's a great shout.
Yeah, again, Monte Ellis, I mentioned earlier when OJ Mayo got brought up. Monte Ellis is just awesome. In some of the early 2010s NBA 2Ks, just a super dominant scorer. In fact, you look at Monte Ellis in those games and, you wish that, video games could have made Allen Iverson play similar. In the older NBA 2Ks, the mechanics weren't the same. The AI wasn't the same. The technology wasn't the same in those older games. And I think that limited how well Allen Iverson was able to be represented in his prime in those video games. But at the end of the day, Monte Ellis, super tough to guard in those early 2010s NBA 2Ks.
Ellis actually spotlighted in the introduction, the iconic introduction for NBA 2K14 for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, doing that 360 layup. And finally, Brad says, Kevin Martin with the Timberwolves, 2K14 I think, it was like he'd never miss. When I'd play with them, I didn't really make anything, I couldn't get the hang of his shooting style. And once again, there's that disconnect, isn't there, Derek, when the CPU can just dominate with a player, but when you get on the sticks and they're on your team, just can't dominate with them the same.
Yeah, actually, Steph Curry is one of those guys oftentimes, especially in the mid-late 2000s NBA 2Ks, and actually kind of in most of the NBA 2Ks that I've played, I think Steph Curry's shot is kind of hard to master. And I feel like we miss a lot more with Curry than the CPU does. But yeah, Kevin Martin has that awkward release, hard to get down the timing. But I remember getting killed by Kevin Martin. I brought him up earlier in the show as well. I remember getting the CPU killing me with Kevin Martin in many different versions of NBA 2K.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience with Steph Curry, and maybe it's because I overestimate my abilities or overestimate his ratings. Obviously, they've added different badges over the years to allow you to hit those long-range shots. I remember that coming in 2K17 after he was kind of breaking the game in real life. And I also remember that one year, possibly 2K17, his shooting form was one of the recommended ones for point guard my players, and I remember doing fairly well with it one of those years, but that was kind of an outlier. He is kind of hard to dominate with in a realistic manner.
So yeah, thank you to the community for all the responses. This is a fun topic, Andrew, and I'm sure I left out some CPU-controlled players that consistently dominate me and whatnot. But at the end of the day, as long as we're having fun, that's all that matters.
And it is one of those topics that really brings us together, I think. A really shared experience, because we've all had these players. You see so many of these overlapping names in games. We've had that same experience with those players in those games. It's really cool to talk about. I miss that in basketball gaming discourse. Obviously, here we are talking about it, but with all the discussion about my team cards or the metagaming, the meta builds in my career, I'm not saying don't discuss that, but we've kind of moved away as a community from discussing these things about games. And they are fascinating topics. And again, they do bring us together as a community because it is that shared experience on the virtual hardwood.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why doing the NLSC podcast is so fun. It's the community involvement. It's asking these questions and hearing these stories and hearing the similarities as well to stuff that we have experienced in these games and whatnot. So yeah, thank you for all the responses to the community question. I look forward to it every single week.
Absolutely. And please keep the conversation going in the comments. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in. And a reminder that you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media, and we'd appreciate a follow. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
You can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC, D43, and on YouTube, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.